The Hoop Heads Podcast is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Hey Hoop Heads! Wanted to take a minute to shout out our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market, and they truly accelerate skill development faster than ever. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com and follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Mention the Hoop Heads podcast and save an extra $300 on the Dr. Dish Rebel, All-Star, and CT models. Also, make sure to check out the new Dr. Dish Home Machine, which is perfect for these crazy times when gyms and schools are closed. Visit drdishbasketball.com for details. That's a great deal, Hoop Heads. Get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
Hi, this is Coach Mark Anderson from the Owensboro Thoroughbreds of the TBL, and you're listening to the Hoop Heads Podcast.
Prepare like the pros with the all-new Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Fast Draw has been the #1 play diagramming software for coaches for years, and now with its integrated web platform, coaches have the ability to add video to plays and share them directly to their players' Android and iPhones via their mobile app. You'll quickly see why Fast Model Sports has the most compelling and intuitive basketball software out there. In addition to a great product, they also provide basketball coaching content and resources through their blog and play bank. For access to these plays and more information, visit fastmodelsports.com or follow them on Twitter at FastModel.
My only goal in coaching this girls program is that when these girls graduate, that they look back on it and they say, man, am I really happy that I played basketball.
Ken Rector is in his second season as the girls varsity basketball coach at Barberton High School in the state of Ohio. Ken previously spent 20 years as the head boys basketball coach at Barberton High. Rector's teams won 314 games over those 20 seasons, and his teams won 8 conference titles, 3 district titles, and over 70% of their games. He was named the 2009 AP Ohio Division I Coach of the Year. Ken is also the co-host, along with Zac Jackson, of the On the Bench podcast, which is dedicated to covering high school basketball in Northeast Ohio. We recently launched the Hoop Heads Mentorship Program. We believe that having a mentor is the best way to maximize your potential and become a transformational coach. By matching you up with one of our experienced mentors, you'll develop a one-on-one relationship that will help your coaching, your team, your program, and your mindset. The Hoop Heads Mentorship Program delivers mentoring services to basketball coaches at all levels through our team of experienced head coaches. Find out more at hoopheadspod.com or shoot me an email directly, mike@hoopheadspod.com. Our roster of shows is growing, so don't forget to check out all our other podcasts on the Hoop Heads Pod Network, including Thrive with Trevor Huffman, Beyond the Ball, the CoachMaze.com podcast, Players Court, Bleachers and Boards, and the Green Light podcast, plus our team-focused NBA pods, Cavaliers Central, Grizz and Grind, Nuck If You Buck, the 305 Culture, Blazing the Path, Hashtag Lakers, Motor City Hoops, X's and O's NBA Breakdown, Spanning the Spurs, LA Hoops, and Thunderous Applause. We're looking for more NBA podcasters interested in hosting their own show centered on a particular team. Email us info@hoopheadspod.com if you're interested in learning more and bringing your talent to our network. Listen and learn from this episode with Ken Rector, girls basketball varsity head coach at Barberton High School in the state of Ohio. Hello and welcome to the Hoop Heads Podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here without my co-host Jason Sunkel tonight, but I am pleased to be joined by the head coach of the Barberton Magic Girls Program, Ken Rector. Ken, welcome to the Hoop Heads Pod.
Hey, thank you, Mike. I'm looking forward to it and excited to be on here talking about hoops.
Absolutely. We are excited to be able to have you on, get an opportunity to learn about all the great things you've been able to do at the game in a lot of different positions in a lot of different places. So I want to go ahead and start off by asking you how you got into the game of basketball as a kid. What was it about the game that made you fall in love with it? Just talk about some of your first experiences.
Well, I think, first of all, I was involved or had a father that, loved athletics, had a family that, extended family, I say, that, anytime anybody got together, there was always, sports being played. I watched my uncles when I was 2-3 years old. I can remember watching them play at every, family get together. And then, just like anybody else, you once you catch that bug, you want to be a part of it. And as a kid, I was the absolute perfect age to grow up in Barberton. I was 5th and 6th grade when the Bodner brothers and Carter Scott and the Magics were on the scene, winning a state title. And when you're that age and you're, there's no time in your life probably that you're more impressionable than that. And growing up in Barberton and being able to watch those teams and read about them and see that, it was just a magical time. And every kid, I don't care who you were, every kid that age, you lived in Barberton at that time, you wanted to be the next basketball player. You just wanted to have the opportunity to play on that court. And I think that's when the bug hit. And, I was addicted to athletics, I'll tell you that.
How did you go about as a coach, once you got to coaching, and we'll come back to you as a kid, but I think that's one of the things that across the board, and maybe not everywhere, but I think it is a little bit different when you think about how younger kids have a connection to the high school program. I felt growing up in Strongsville sort of the same way that you did. Like from the time I was a young kid, I just looked up to all the players. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to run out to the fight song. It was something that I aspired to from a really young age. And I think I went to so many games, and it just was something that was kind of just born into me, for lack of a better way of saying it. And I just wonder about today. It's just a different situation with high school students attending games and just trying to instill that sort of community spirit and getting your younger kids involved. So as a coach, what do you do to try to keep that same feeling that you had as a kid within the people that are part of your program, within the young players in your program?
Well, it's really difficult. I will say that, and I think it has to follow along those same kind of guidelines. You got to have some special kids that are part of your program that just kind of draws in the appeal from the adults in the community, and then it gets passed on to the younger kids. And a perfect example, I just was able to attend a wedding this past weekend of one of my former players from the 2009 district, title team that we had. And, we lost in the regional finals that year, but that was the closest I think that the community of Barberton had ever been back to the days of 75 and 76. For whatever reason, those kids were so special in the way that they played and the way that they were represented the community when they went out there and played. It just attracted the adults in the community, first of all, who then wanted their kids to be a part of it. And, and that lasted for several years after that. It was just a special, special feeling. But it just doesn't carry over now like it used to. It's not a generational thing. You don't have the same type of, I guess you don't have the same type of generations, growing up and living in Barberton and their kids growing up and living in Barberton or anywhere. There's just so much movement now for jobs and everything else. It's really hard to get something like that to sustain itself.
All right, so all that being said, I think one of the things that is interesting when you go back and you think about the time when you grew up and when I grew up, so you graduated from high school in 84, right?
Yes, 84.
I graduated in 88, so we're kind of the same generation of you went out and you played all kinds of sports, and you mostly played them not in a gym or in a travel situation like kids play today. You just played in your neighborhood or at the local playground or whatever it was. So talk about what that was like for you to grow up in that kind of atmosphere in Barberton, both from a basketball standpoint, but also just from the other sports that you play, because I know you were a multi-sport letterman in high school. So what did it mean to you to be a multi-sport athlete?
Well, I think it was, that's all I ever wanted to be. I mean, there was nothing else that mattered to me at that time. And the competition to do so was, pretty fierce because that's what everybody wanted to do. But, growing up in Barberton, the community itself, it was Barberton was and still is a neighborhood park community. So every neighborhood had a park that was well taken care of. The basketball courts were outstanding. And, there were a couple throughout the city that, got more play, or I say more competitive than others. But you couldn't go by a park without kids playing there. And, that's kind of when you knew if you could get into a game at Tuss Park, during the week at any time, then that's when you realize you had a chance to, you might actually get to play because, there were many nights, that I'd ride my bike over to that park and I'd sit on the sideline and I'd watch these guys play. And again, they were, I may have been a middle school kid at the time and they were older kids, high school kids, college kids. But you probably learned just as much just sitting there watching them play, just waiting for your chance. And, the one time, somebody looked at you and said, okay, I'm going to have Rector come on in. It was the greatest thrill of your life. At that point you thought, okay, I waited here for 12 days, 4 hours every day, and I finally got my chance. There's a chance I might be able to play for Barberton someday. And it was similar to that in, with the other sports. I mean, I just was lucky that I didn't really have a favorite. If it was football season, and football was my sport, and basketball, baseball. But you're right when you say that that's all kids did was play outside, and that's all we did. I mean, it was just an incredible time to grow up if you wanted to be an athlete, and an incredible place to grow up if you wanted to be an athlete also.
Yeah, I agree with you. I always say, and it's kind of been a theme that's run through the podcast, that I feel bad for my own kids in some ways because of the way that I grew up and the freedom that I had to be able to go and just find games in the neighborhood and go to the local park and play. And as I'm sitting there listening to your story about sitting at the park and watching guys play, I know my strategy was always, especially when I was younger, was I was going to be the first one there, so that when they first game got going and they just had 10 guys, I could always be one of those 10 because I was always the first guy there. And then I made sure I was, as it was getting dark or as the lights were going off, I was always the last guy to leave because I could probably get in the last game. So if nothing else, I could always find my way into the first game and the last game. And then, as you said, you kind of start to figure out what you can do, what you can't do, and you're playing with guys that are older than you and, from different places than you. And it's just, to me, I've always said that some of my best experiences as a basketball player weren't in organized basketball. They were out there on the playground. And I look back on my time as a basketball player, and some of those fondest memories are from playground basketball for sure. So if you think about going up and, getting into high school, and obviously today it's much more difficult because of the specialization to play multiple sports. But if you look back on your time as a high school athlete, give us one or two things that stand out to you memory-wise. And it could be something not even basketball related. Maybe it's in another sport. But just one or two of your favorite memories of being a high school athlete in Barberton.
Well, first of all, playing at, you got to understand it's no longer around, but the industrial arts gym that we played in, it was later named Jack Reynolds Gym, but the game, every game was sold out. I mean, that's something that our kids don't experience at. We had, the benches were in the end zones. You had fans that were just kind of hanging over the court.
Yep.
And it was, every game was a sellout. And, you don't get that same feel now. We play in our gym at Barberton right now is as nice as there is anywhere. But it's just not the same feeling as you had when, people were lining up at, 6 a.m. to get the chance to purchase season tickets, 2 months before the season started, and knowing when you went in there that every game was going to be sold out, and knowing, let's be honest, at that point, knowing that when you went under the court, you looked down at the other end at the kids warming up, and they wanted nothing to do with being there. So you felt like you were up 20 before the game even started. And, and part of that was that atmosphere, and part of that was just, the way Coach Grinolds just kind of had things going at that point, and you just felt like, why are these guys even showing up tonight? Because, they're going to get beat down. And that was kind of the attitude that he brought to everybody who was playing. And again, that was an incredible memory. And, and back to the Parks thing, I'll tell you what was really special also is that the players that were playing there, the older guys that I looked up to and wanted to get out there on court, not all of them played, high school basketball at Barberton. Some of them just didn't make those teams, but they were incredible players who, played at the, every day at the Parks. But what they did do is they passed on what had been given to them when they were at that park. They made it they didn't just, play for themselves. They were playing out there and teaching us younger kids things that we could use to carry on the tradition of not only Barberton basketball, but the tradition of basketball in Barberton at those parks. I mean, everybody felt like it was our job too. When we got to the point where we're in college and we're coming back and we're still playing there, now we were the ones that were looking for the younger kids that really wanted to play and making sure they got on our team so that, what we had going was going to continue for a while.
You finish up your high school career as an athlete and you start thinking about where you're going to go and play your sports in college, and talk a little bit about just what that decision-making process looked like for you in terms of what you were looking for, what you hoped to accomplish both academically and athletically, and how you ended up making the decision to go to Mount Union.
Well, I really didn't know what sport I wanted to play in college. I knew it was going to be football or basketball. I actually had a couple Division I offers in football, but they were military academies, and I really did not want, to go in that direction. And I actually visited more schools for football, and I went down to Mount Union, and I was there for, visiting the school for football, and I ran into Coach Daffler, who I knew because we'd gone to camps there and stuff, and he kind of just talking to me, and he said, boy, we were really kind of hoping you were interested in playing basketball. And I said, well, I am. Like I said, it was basketball season. So I was, that was my favorite sport at that moment.
Right.
And he said, well, we were getting the word that you had already decided, maybe it's because of some of the offers that were publicized, that you were really interested in playing football. And I said, no, actually right now, if I had my choice, I would rather play basketball. And to his credit, somehow that word had gotten out, and I really wasn't receiving a lot of information on basketball. And even though we were really successful, I had good numbers, whatever. And to his credit, he let everybody know, like within his coaching circle, with the OAC and other, Division III and Division II coaches that he knew, he let them know that, hey, I just talked to Ken Rector and he's actually interested in playing basketball. And then I started getting some information and contact and calls and everything regarding basketball. And as much as anything, that may be the one thing that sold me on Mount Union, was the character of Coach Daffler. To, he could have just, kept that information quiet and acted like he was the only coach that was interested in me playing basketball, but he didn't. He let everybody else know, and he wanted me to pick the right school for me. and it ended up being Mount Union, and and it was a great decision for me.
Well, I'm sure, one, that you learned something, whether or not you had in mind at that time to be a coach, which we'll talk about here in a second, but just you think about somebody who put your interest as a student athlete ahead of his own interest. And when you think about what good coaches do and really what they're all about, when you look at coaching, to me, it's always about, if you're making decisions that are in the best interest of your kids, then I think you're doing things the right way. And when you start making decisions that aren't in the best interest of your kids, that's when you start getting on a slippery slope. So the fact that he did that for you, and I'm sure that made an impression, obviously, on you from a college decision and where you were going to go, but then also, I'm sure, long-term just made you think about, hey, here's a guy who went out of his way to help me out to do something that was maybe not necessarily advantageous for him, but was to my benefit as a student athlete. I'm sure that was very, very impactful. How challenging then was it during those 4 years to play both sports? Talk a little bit about that experience.
Well, I my freshman year, I only played basketball, and I really, really missed football. And of course, I was still in contact with the football coaches, and, Mount Union was just at the point where they were starting to, I think they were really on the verge of taking that turn that they did to become the national power that they are right now. And Coach Karras was not the head coach at that time, but he was close to it. I think he became the head coach my junior year. But so I talked to the coaches. I talked to the basketball coach. I said, hey, I really miss it. Can I play my sophomore year? And they all agreed it'd be fine. I got the opportunity to play. It was an incredible experience. I loved everything about it. I always tell the story, Coach Karras was taking over my junior year, and my sophomore year, when I got the chance to play at the end of the year, I got hurt. I tore a rotator cuff in my shoulder. I had to make a decision to have surgery or to miss basketball, and I chose basketball. But I always tell Coach Karras, I said, you know what, if I'd have chose football, you would have started me that next year, and there's no possible way that I would have had as good a year as the kid that did play. and you never would have won all the national championships that you did, because you'd have picked the wrong guy from the beginning. But it was a great experience. Now, I will say it was a tough experience because, when I was at Barberton, we won 20 games every year. When I was at Mount Union my freshman year, we won our first game, and people were so excited. And I kept thinking, man, we were terrible tonight. We were lucky to win. Why is everybody so happy? Well, then we lost 19 games in a row, and I didn't think I was going to make it. I mean, I literally, it was just mentally for me, I just didn't think I was going to be able to survive it. And but we finished with a couple wins, and then the next year I think we won 7 games, and then the next year we won, I think 13 and then 15. So, the growth through those years taught me things too. It taught me a lot, I think, about leadership and how to try to get the most out of every player, even when you're, maybe we didn't have the most talent in the league. The OAC at that time, it was just like it is now. It was an incredible league. Every year, the National Player of the Year came out of the conference. And so I think I learned a lot from that as well.
Do you know where to hit the backboard for the highest percentage shots? Do you know when using the backboard is better than taking a direct shot? Be certain that you are taking the highest percentage shots by training with the Shoticle. The Shoticle mounts on your backboard to give you the location of the highest percentage shots. Train with the Shoticle, and you will score more. Basketball is a data-driven game, so don't ignore the data and the facts. We worry about the data so you can focus on shooting. Visit Shoticle.com now and start scoring more. Did you, at that point when you're in school, were you thinking about coaching and education at that point? Is that kind of the direction that you saw yourself going, or did you have something else in mind when you got done, when you graduated?
Well, I majored in business and I minored. I minored my junior year. I minored in secondary education because in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, you know what, if I ever want to coach, it'd be nice to have that as a backup plan. I'm going to go into business. I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but it'd be nice to have education as a backup. So I took classes my sophomore, junior year towards an education certification or minor. And then I started thinking, well, you know what, to do this, that means my senior year, I'm going to have to get up at 6 a.m. and student teach, all semester. And I said, well, I'm not sure I want to do that. So let's put a pause on that and let's minor in something else. But that being said, it was always in my mind. It wasn't like the primary thing I was going to do, but it was something that I knew that, that I would probably be involved somehow. And when I graduated, I was, friends with, really looked up to, still look up to. He's an incredible mentor. The current Barberton coach at that time was Roger Kramer, who was my JV coach when I was playing there. He was also the current head coach at Barberton. So while I got a job in the business field, I was selling commercial insurance, truck insurance mostly. I was in Barberton and I started helping him out. And I really enjoyed it. And I kind of knew then that that would be the move that I would make at some point. I just had to figure out how to do it.
So what was it about coaching initially, that first experience? What was it that you really liked about it?
Well, you mentioned I like being able to, I don't know, I'll take it back to what I said about, the parks in Barberton and giving back. I felt like I had been blessed so much by, being able to play for Coach Reynolds. And I really felt that I was so lucky to be a part of something so special and what Barberton basketball was that, it was more a way for me to give back what had been given to me than it was anything about, I guess leadership or anything like that. It was just a way for me to give back. I loved the game so much. I had a passion for competition. I had a passion for the game of basketball and how I felt that it should be played or could be played. And I just felt natural when I started doing it. I enjoyed it. And that was the direction I knew at some point I'd have to move into, and was lucky enough that I had started those classes at Mount, because when I made the decision, it wasn't an easy one. I sold insurance for 3 years. I enjoyed what I was doing. I was in a good situation. Then all of a sudden you got to drop everything and I got to take 24 hours at Akron U to get my teaching certificate so I could move in that direction. So it was a big lifestyle change as well. I was on my own and all of a sudden I'm moving back home. I'm taking 24 hours of classes. I'm coaching, 10 straight weeks of summer camp in the summer, going from one place to the other. And then incredibly lucky to land my first coaching job was as a varsity assistant to Dave Close at Stowe High School. So, you can't do any better than that. I say this over and over and over again that, the success I've had is as much due to the luck that I had in growing up in Barberton, playing for Coach Reynolds, having a mentor and a friend of Roger Kramer, who was an incredible coach, and actually getting to coach with him for 3 years. And then your first job is Dave Close. Now you tell me anybody that's had the opportunity to coach under 3 better coaches than that And if I wouldn't have been at least a little bit successful, then it would have been 100% on me, because those 3 are as good as there is and ever has been, really.
All right, so let's think about those first 2 years as a varsity assistant. What are some things that you remember that you learned from Dave in those first 2 years that you still carry with you in your coaching today?
Well, I learned an awful lot, and primarily about details and organization and planning and breakdowns and just, cutting things up into little parts and then building it back up, because that was nothing like I had ever experienced before. And I tell people this all the time. I mean, when I was in Jack was so great at teaching people how to play the game. We never had any plays. I mean, we didn't have out of bounds plays. Our out of bounds plays were line up and get open. I mean, he taught you how to play the game. When I went to college and, the coaches, first practice coach is saying, okay, we're going shell. I'm like, I had no idea what he was talking about. It was a foreign language, because we didn't do that. I mean, when we were at Barberton and we were playing and Jack was coaching, we may have ran the blitz drill for 45 straight minutes or an hour and a half, but there were no plays. You just learned how to play the game. You played hard, you played fast, and if you couldn't do that, there were 15 other kids sitting along the wall that would come in and take your place. So when I learned some things obviously in college that, okay, it's not always like that. But when I got with Dave and, another thing, Dave saw the personnel that he had on his team during those years, and they were unlike anything that he had coached before. We had a bunch of kids that could handle it, shoot it, pass it, play hard. They could, we were a team of guards, and he had always had teams that had solid big men that he liked to walk it down the floor, execute. If it took 45 passes to get a layup, that's what we were going to do. Well, he saw what we had on that roster and completely changed what he was going to do, which told me, one thing. If you're going to be successful, you better be able to adapt to the kids that you have in your program and what their abilities are. I think there are a lot of coaches that get comfortable with one thing, and then they try to just keep doing that thing their entire career. And I just don't think it works that way. And Dave was certainly a testimony to me to that. But he was also able to incorporate those things that had made him so successful that I still have, I still have every practice plan that, he had as an assistant. I'd make a copy of it every day, and I kept all of them because it was so eye-opening to me that you could be that detailed in a game and how important some of that was. So that's really the main thing that I brought from my years as his assistant. That, and how much time you got to put into it. You're never going to cheat the amount of time that you have to put into the game to be successful in trying to coach the game.
All right, so 2 questions related to that. The first one is, when you're talking about making adjustments to the way that you play based on your personnel, and clearly most coaches tend to have a philosophy offensively, defensively, things that you like to do as a coach or the style of play that you'd like to have, but you have to make changes based on your personnel and what you have. As a high school coach, you clearly don't have control over who the players are that walk through your doors of your gym. You got to just adjust to what you have. So how do you go about, as a coach over the course of your career, how did you go about finding the things that you wanted to do differently? What were some of the sources? Did you go to mentor coaches? Did you go to clinics? Did you watch video? What was it that you were doing to try to pick up new things that you could do to help you adjust off of your base system? So that's question number 1. Then I'll come back to question 2.
Okay. Well, I first of all, I think you do have to have a philosophy. There's nothing wrong with having a philosophy. I still have, probably the same philosophy of the way I would like to play. But I think you got to be smart enough to understand, you can try it, but you got to be smart enough to understand when you're going to be able to do it or not be able to do it. And I think, like any coach, I think that you've got to, I think most of the time I went to mentor coaches. I was lucky enough to have coaches. The coaching community, as you know, is a special group of people. We're, nobody knows how hard it is to be a coach except for coaches. And for the most part, we want to see each other succeed. And so I think when I had questions about, maybe personnel or, maybe trying something that I'd never done before, I think it was easy for me, especially at that time, to go to other coaches and just kind of talk about it. I can remember just getting together and, when you went to a team camp and you'd spend the night, just, with a pad of paper and pen and 4 other coaches in the room, and that's all you did was just talk about philosophies and things that you could do with your kids, and you gathered that type of information. I don't think it's like that anymore. And I think, and rightfully so, because like you mentioned also, now you can get on the internet and you can find out, anything you want to know.
Absolutely.
And you can find film on it. You can find, breakdowns on it. So it's not the same, but I really, really enjoyed those times when, coaches used to be able to get together 4 or 5, and they still can. It just doesn't happen as much now.
Yeah, I think it's more of a challenge, although I do think that I think coaches are probably even more open to those kinds of conversations than they were 15, 20 years ago, simply because now, even if you want to hide something, it's impossible to hide it. So even if you think you have something that's so unique and we have this offense or we have this, whatever philosophy, culture thing that we think is the key secret sauce to our program, everybody's going to find that out simply because, again, it's all over the internet and people talk and social media, and it's just impossible to keep things hidden, even if that's what you wanted to do. So I agree with you on that point. And then the second question that I wanted to ask based off what you said before was, you talked about, you can't cheat the process. Like, there's just an investment of time that is non-negotiable if you want to have success. So one of the things that I always think when I look back on high school basketball over the last 25 or 30 years, I think that the amount of time that a coach has to put in as just a baseline level in order to just be in the conversation of being successful, I think that baseline amount of time that you have to put in has gone up. Because again, you think about when you and I were growing up as kids, in the summertime, you weren't hanging out with your high school basketball coach and playing in a summer league or going to high school open gym. You were on the playground and you were playing in that way. You weren't at a 4-man workout or whatever. You were just doing that stuff on your own. Whereas today, we know that high school coaches, you've got to put that time in, or in a lot of cases, players won't be in the gym. They won't be doing those workouts. They won't be playing because, one, those games aren't available anymore. Playground basketball, as you and I know it, doesn't exist anymore. So I guess the question that I want to ask you is, explain to people what you put time in on as a high school varsity coach today, maybe that you didn't have to a long time ago, and then just give people an idea of how much time that you're spending as a high school varsity coach today in the year 2020.
Well, first of all, you're 100% correct. The amount of time that you have to invest in it now, it's too much time. It really is. To have a family and to devote, the time to them that they deserve, and then also the pressure to put the amount of time in that you need to with your high school program is, there's not enough hours in the day, and it's really an unfair burden to coaches and their families, but. There's just no way to fully explain the needs of some of the kids that we're, coaching, and not every district is the same. But, all the kids have emotional needs that you need to, help satisfy. They've got educational needs. You're the first person that, a teacher's going to go to if the kid is having a problem in class. The number of kids that are out there, especially in some districts, even that we had at Barberton, that, that you have, they've got their Algebra 2 homework due that night or due the next day, but when they leave your practice, they're trying to figure out, okay, am I going to be able to eat tonight and where am I going to sleep? Those type of things that you become invested in and involved in. The practice planning, the scouting of opponents, the scouting of your own team and practices. Again, it's all great because you can film all these things now, but there's just more things
right,
for
exactly.
you
There's more stuff to watch,
to have to do.
Absolutely.
You get to the off season, and you've got the individual workouts that you can do. You've got the like you said, if you're not bringing the kids in a lot of cases, then they're not getting any work done, and you just feel like you're constantly falling behind if you're not doing something 24/7, and it's really unhealthy. I mean, it's an unhealthy way to. I tell people, and I'm better at it now in my second stint here as the girls coach. I'm not sure I could be a boys coach right now, and I guess I could explain that later.
Hey, hoopheads, we all hate ankle sprains, and they happen way too often. Ankle injuries are the #1 sports-related injury. Arise is trying to change that. With the iFast, your athletes get preventative protection and full mobility. Athletes no longer need to wear bulky braces that limit performance and give mediocre protection. Anyone playing sports should be using these products. Keep your athletes in the game. Don't wait for them to get hurt to take action. Visit www.arise.com, spelled ARYSE, and use the code HOOPHEADS to get 20% off the future of performance. That's ARYSE.com with promo code HOOPHEADS to get 20% off.
When I was coaching the boys, it was almost like I could not allow myself to have fun, because if I was having fun doing something, then that meant my mind wasn't on the next game or my team or whatever was happening with basketball. So it was almost like, I'm not gonna enjoy this time because I've got to keep my mind focused on the task at hand. And you do that for 20 years.
That'll burn you out fast.
Yeah. I mean, you're just worn out. But I think a lot of coaches, you just can't help it. I mean, you feel that. And plus, Barberton wasn't your typical job either. I mean, the expectation level there was through the roof every year, no matter what. And so, I think that had something to do with it. But I think also I did it to myself as much as anything, because I had such a competitive nature and, a desire to keep Barberton where it was. And, and it was just kind of the perfect storm of things. But it is an incredibly taxing profession, but, an incredibly rewarding profession also.
All right, so let me ask you this. If you could wave a magic wand and change something about the system to make it so that it was better for coaches and probably better for players as well, what's something, or is there anything that you could think of off the top that you could change that would make a coach's job, and again, easier is the wrong word, but
right,
just put less demand on a high school varsity coach? Because I agree with everything you said.
Well, that's a tough question, because if you talk to a lot of coaches, for years, coaches wanted more time with their teams. So it went from 0 days to 10 days. And then we wanted individual workouts. And then it went from, okay, you're allowed to do it with 4 or 6 or whatever the number is. And so we kind of put this burden on ourselves because, we kept the pressure to be quote unquote successful as far as wins and losses are concerned are so great or you're out of a job. So, the easy answer for a lot of people would be to put more time into it. Now, if you're asking me that question, to make it easier on coaches, you almost have to go backwards.
Yeah.
You have to go backwards and just kind of like, listen, these kids need a break, but that's never going to happen. There's no going backwards because of, there's other opportunities that if they're not in the gym with you, then, they may be learning other things from other people, or with the way transfers are right now, that's another thing. I mean,
could you have ever imagined, like as a kid growing up, like I just think about growing up the way I did, and there was never, ever a thought in my head of going anywhere except to Strongsville High School. I had never even crossed my mind that I would go anywhere else. Didn't want to go anywhere else. Just wanted to play with my friends who I had played with all the time growing up as a young kid. I just can't imagine it. And now it seems like, kids come up and because they're playing on all these different AAU teams and it's just, you don't have that same connection with each other. And then therefore, kind of like we talked about off the top, they don't feel that same connection with their home public school in a lot of cases.
No, I mean, we could do an entire, podcast on just that, and the way things are changed. But I think you're right. I myself, I didn't have, a thought of I just lived to be a Barberton Magic. That was what my sole purpose in life was as a kid.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to do, but then again, because it was so special in Barberton, I played with kids that, maybe they were in a different neighboring district, but man, all they wanted was a piece of that, So, we had the occasional transfer that would come into Barberton, whose family would move into Barberton, because of, the program itself, but we never had anybody leave, that kind of thing. So I don't know. Like I said, the demands on coaches these days, keeping, it sounds ridiculous to say, but keeping players happy, keeping parents happy, keeping administrators happy, keeping other teachers happy, keeping, your own family happy. It is a tough job.
Yeah, I agree. I always say, and I think this goes with education too, and, kind of to extend from coaching, is that it's one of the few professions where you have so many, quote, bosses or people that you're trying to satisfy. And if you're in business, maybe you're trying to satisfy the customer and you're trying to satisfy your boss. So maybe you have two. And maybe sometimes those are, maybe sometimes they're in conflict, but for the most part, the customer wants to get a good experience and your boss wants your customer to have a good experience. Whereas you get into education, get into coaching, and what may be a good experience for one player or what needs to be a good experience for them is not necessarily what they're looking for. And so that obviously becomes a huge challenge. So let's ask that question. So how do you engage your players when you're talking about helping them to understand what their role is? Because clearly everyone, from probably your best player down to your 12th player, doesn't play as much as they think they should, or their parents think they should, or doesn't get as many shots as they think they should. So how do you help to define roles for the players on your team?
Well, I will say this. It is significantly easier with girls than with the boys. And not that girls, I think girls want to win more as far as, they really want to be, I don't know how to say this correctly, but I think do you think they want to
win together maybe?
Yes.
That's what always, my experience with coaching my daughters is I feel like they do want to win, but they want to win together. Whereas boys kind of want to be the straw that stirs the drink that causes the winning.
I know what you're absolutely right. The girls, it is there's a social aspect to being a part of the girls team that is different than any other dynamic with the boys. You know, they want to be a part of the team. As a matter of fact, there are many of them that want to be that fourth and fifth wheel. They really don't want to be the first or second, person where the responsibility falls on, but they all want to be a part of something. And I'll go back to my daughter was a track athlete, and they all loved being a part of the relay. You know, that was everybody's favorite event, was when they could be one leg of the relay versus being a part of an individual event, because it just, for whatever reason, maybe they felt like it was less pressure or whatever the reason is, but they celebrated like there was like no other when they would win a relay race versus an individual title. When they would win a relay race, their celebrations were so much more pronounced than if they won an individual race, just because they really like being a part of something special, not necessarily, the focus point of something special. And, I've really enjoyed that about coaching girls. That's been probably the thing that I've enjoyed the most, is they really want to be a part of, it just kind of brings you back to way maybe you felt like things were back when you were growing up. You wanted to be a part of something special. And that's kind of the way I felt with coaching the girls these last couple of years.
So when you retired from the boys' job, at that point, did you have any thought that you would want to get back into it, where maybe you were just saying, I want to take a couple of years off and then come back? Or was it a case where at that point you kind of thought, I'm done, I'm going to continue teaching, but my coaching career at the high school level is finished?
No, I thought I was done. I mean, all the stars aligned to where this was the perfect time. I'd been coaching for 25 years. I'd been the head coach at Barberton for 20 years. No one had ever coached any varsity sport at Barberton longer than that. It was it was kind of like a perfect storm of numbers. My son had just graduated. My daughter was he was going to go down to Ohio State and be a manager for the basketball team. My daughter was getting ready to run her final year of collegiate track. So I was going to watch her play. I was going to go down and watch Ohio State play, see my son. I felt like, hey, I've put in the time. That was it. I had nothing more to give, kind of thing, and then, of course, but nobody believes that. Everybody's always asking you. And right. I think our AD at Barberton one day, and this may have been maybe after I'd been out for my second year or something, he said, do you ever think you'd ever coach again? That kind of thing. And I said, no. And he's like, come on, there might be something. And I said, you know what? And I said it kind of jokingly, but I did say, I said, the only job that I think I would ever consider would be the girls' job here. I'm not going anywhere teaching wise. I've still got X number of years here to teach. I said, I really enjoyed when I was coaching my daughter and her friends and, in AU in the spring. It was such a difference from coaching the boys. I said, but, I think that would be the only one I would consider. But I said, and by consider, I mean, there might be a 10% chance I'd even look at it, because I was great at retirement. I'm telling you, I loved it. And after doing it for so long, it was so nice. And that and the fact that Barberton, the girls had a really good coach who'd been there a while, and I figured he's going to be there for, the next 10 years anyway. So I figured I was safe in saying that. Well, then, a year and a half later, he gets another job and he's not going to be able to coach, and it's July. They don't have a coach. There's some girls on the team that I had coached their brothers. The AD just somehow happened to remember what I told him. And next thing you know, I felt like I was, it's like, I tried to get away and they pulled me right back in. But it's been great.
So when you do that, what's something that you took away from the boys' job when you think about when you got out and then you're going to get back in? What was something that you felt had to be different in order for you to be able to come back and coach again? Just whether it's from your own perspective of these are some things that I need to do differently, or maybe some things that are different about the circumstances. Just what were you looking for when you came back to that job?
Well, I told that when the superintendent and assistant superintendent and athletic director all got me in a room and we were talking about, the job. And I said, and I told them, I said, I coached the boys for 20 years here. Like, if we didn't win that game that night, I may die that night. I mean, I may not survive the night. I mean, that's how, it's such a level of intensity I felt like I had to be in to do that job. And I said, I am not doing that with the girls. I said, my only goal in coaching this girls program is that when these girls graduate, that they look back on it and they say, man, am I really happy that I played basketball, and that someday when they have kids, that they want their child to play basketball and have the same or similar experience that they did. I said, that's it. That's my only goal. I said, if that's not what you're looking for, I completely understand it. I said, but if that sounds good to you, then I'm your guy. I'll give it a shot and we'll see what happens. And they thought that was a great idea. And, I'm trying to live up to that every day. It's not easy. But the girls that I've had last year part of the program, this year that are part of the program, they're making it easier on me because, they make it enjoyable to come in to practice, and they kind of, when I start to get a little over the top, they somehow find a way to bring me back down and keep everything in perspective. So it's been really good.
How have you been able to shift that mindset, which I'm sure if we went back and we talked to you in your very first year as the head coach of the Barberton boys program 25 years ago, that what you just described as sort of what you were looking for in the girls' job would not have been what you would have described when you first got that boys' job. So how have you been able to adjust your mindset? Because it's not an easy mindset to just adapt when you're somebody who has been competitive your entire life. And I think that's one of the things that I always equate it, for me anyway. I look at it when I've coached my own kids' teams, and that's really where I've been a head coach, or I was a head JV coach for a couple of years. When I'm coaching and I'm the head coach, those losses, those games stick with me every single second of every day from the time I lose a game until I get to play the next one. And then conversely, I go and I'll watch my kids play, whether it's basketball or play another sport, and I find myself just being far more detached and less connected to the outcome, where I want them to do well and I want them to win. But if they don't, when the game's over, I just give them a hug and we get in the car and we go home, and I don't really bat an eye over those wins and losses. But yet if I was the person sitting on the bench, I would be completely distraught that we lost games. So I'm able to make that disconnect between being a head coach and being a parent. But I'm just curious how you went about kind of shifting your mentality as a head coach to where you're thinking about the experience that the kids are having, which obviously if you're providing them with a good experience, we all know that there's a connection between that and success on the scoreboard as well, but it's just a different way of looking at it. So how did you get to that point that you were able to shift your mind to that particular way of thinking? Hey coaches, parents, and group leaders. I want to introduce you to our newest sponsor, SnapRaise. SnapRaise is the nation's largest digital donation platform built to help teams, youth groups, and clubs raise money quickly and efficiently without selling products. SnapRaise builds your group a customizable campaign website, and students use their mobile devices to connect and engage with their biggest fans. My son's high school team used SnapRaise this season, and our team raised all the money they needed to fund their season, and then some. Getting SnapRaise started is quick and free. Just visit snapraise.com and you'll get connected to a local SnapRaise expert in no time.
Well, it's a struggle. I mean, it's a daily struggle. But I think the main thing is, I think I would say the main reason, I guess, would be, when I was coaching the boys, I mean, there was such a fear of failure, to where, there's no, I don't care what, there's no greater motivator than fear. And there was such a fear of failure, I think, when I was coaching the boys. And not that I was afraid of, being labeled a failure. I was afraid of failing other people, failing the city of Barberton, failing all those people that, built the program to where it was, and I think when I took over, I think we had, trying to think how many years it was. I think we had, like 30 consecutive winning seasons. I didn't want to be the one to break that streak. There was just such a fear of failure that, I don't take with me this time when coaching the girls. They're at a certain, there's no state championship expectations and so on and so forth. So I think that's one thing that has helped. I mean, my expectations are still the same. I want to get the most out of every girl, but it's just not the same. I'm not afraid of failing now. If we fail, we fail, but I know that I've given everything that I have, to be successful. The second thing is, and I told, one of my assistant coaches, Rob Walker, was also my assistant coach for all 20 years when I was at Barberton. He was a JV coach for 20 years, and now he's my varsity assistant for the girls. And when I told him, and he has a daughter that was playing, so I knew I'd be able to pull him in to help coach. But I told him, Rob, I need you to do this for two things. I said, number one is, you'll be able to help explain me to the girls because you've been around me for so long, if maybe they're not getting what I'm saying. And the second thing is, Rob, I am going to delegate like I've never delegated before. And he never believed me because, I, again, going back to maybe that fear of failure, everything was too important to maybe place it on someone else. I had to be a part of it. And I know that's the wrong way to go about things, but I'm just saying that's the way, and I had incredible assistant coaches and I did give them a lot of responsibility, but, I not total autonomy, I guess, And I've been able to do that now. I've been able to hand some things over that maybe little stupid things like equipment purchases and stuff like that. Now I just said, Rob, hey, whatever you want the new uniforms to look like, it's fine with me. You're in charge of that. Just little things like that I probably never would have done as the boys coach that I've been able to kind of let go and just kind of clear that off the plate a little bit to where maybe I can focus more on other things without giving myself a migraine every night or whatever.
I think that delegation piece, like I've talked to a number of coaches on here who have talked about sort of their evolution as coaches and saying that once they felt like they were able to release some of those little minor details or some of the things that they used to do all themselves, once they were able to hand that off to other members of their staff, or in some cases hand it off to the players to make decisions, or to put that in the hands of a manager, or to have a parent doing something that maybe you previously might have done on your own, that once you have the ability to more act like a CEO of the program and you're kind of overseeing all these different departments as opposed to doing everything yourself, that's when they really felt like their programs took off, because now suddenly they could focus more on the big picture and they didn't get caught up doing all this little stuff that, not that it's not important, but it was things that definitely somebody else could do that didn't necessarily require their expertise as a head coach. And it sounds like that's sort of the point that you've gotten to. And I'm just curious, if you were talking to a young coach just starting out, what advice would you give them in terms of delegation? How would you tell them to sort of look at that when they're building a program as a young coach?
Well, I first of all, I'd tell them how hard it is to do, because I know, especially when it's your first job and you're trying to, put your stamp on that program. But especially with what we've talked about, here today, about how much more difficult it is, how much more time consuming it is, my advice would be is, you have to be able to focus on, the critical aspects of player development and program development versus the minor details of what color or style of shoes we're going to wear this year, or what night the team meals are going to be and where they're going to be had. I mean, you've got to be able to trust your assistants and hand things over to them that are still going to allow you to ensure the quality and every aspect of the program that you want to be under your stamp, I guess, So
when you think about that, obviously the key to that is being able to have a staff that you trust and that you can put those things in their hands and know that it's going to get done. So clearly, having the same assistant coach for 20 years in your program and then bringing him over to the girls program, there's obviously a tremendous amount of trust there. But when you think about building out a staff, and let's just say you're trying to find middle school coaches, you're trying to find a spot that you're going to fill, obviously we know that that's challenging. So how do you go about doing that? And again, what advice would you have for coaches in terms of trying to find or hire a staff? What are the characteristics that you look for in somebody who's going to be a part of your staff?
Wow, that's a tough question, because I'm telling you, you can't find middle school coaches. It's probably the most difficult thing that an AD has, is to find middle school coaches, boys, girls, it doesn't matter. And I don't know why, but that's just the way it is right now, and has been for a couple of years. But the main point, I think, with if you're trying to find someone to work for you, is they have to have a passion for the game, and not just a passion for being a coach. Because I think there's a lot of people out there that want to be called coach, but not a lot of them that want to accept all the responsibilities that come with it, and that have a true passion for the game of basketball, not just being that person that gets to tell other people what to do, kind of thing. And sometimes that's hard to find. I've been, so lucky. I mentioned Rob. I had another assistant, Rick Cardinal, who was with me for 16 years. Dan Donnelly was with me for 16 years. And these are all guys that could have had multiple head coaching opportunities, but I think they just really enjoyed what we had built together, and I think they felt like they were a big part of what the Barberton basketball program was all about, and they just weren't going to leave for any job. They did. I think I must have given them enough responsibility to where they felt like they were they felt like they were an integral part of the program. And so they didn't want to leave the program. And, now I don't know if I could ever find guys like that again if I was just starting over, but those were the type of guys that were passionate, incredibly passionate about the game and incredibly passionate about kids. Not so much about, being the one that got their name in the paper, if the team won a game.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And when you start talking about having assistants, I know one of the things that I always felt like as a varsity assistant for a number of years with Phil Schmuck at Richmond Heights was just that, and I had Phil tell me this after the fact, that probably meant more to me than anything that anybody's ever said to me, certainly as a coach. He said to me that the one thing that he always appreciated about me was he knew that I always had his best interest at heart and the program's best interest at heart, and that he could trust me with anything that needed to be done. And I always said that, after he told me that, and it was kind of an unsolicited comment when he and I were talking years after we had finished coaching together, but I just told him, I said, that probably means more to me than just about anything I could have said, because we all know we've been in situations where we've talked to coaches where you've hired somebody or you've had somebody that's kind of been sort of forced onto your staff, and then before you know it, that person is saying things about the program or is kind of undermining what's happening. And when you get into those situations, you really can make an environment pretty toxic pretty quickly. And I just think that as an assistant, you owe it to your head coach to be the person that coach needs you to be. And again, that could be different things for different coaches, but I just think that ability to sort of fill gaps and fill needs for your head coach as an assistant, to me, is really, really an important quality.
And you I couldn't have said it better. I mean, loyalty is so important. You'd rather have a coach that is going to be loyal to you than someone that's, an expert with X and O's or conditioning or whatever it may be. Right. There's nothing more important than loyalty within a staff, and I've been incredibly fortunate to have that both with the boys and now with the girls program. I've got great people working with me.
Let's talk a little bit about your podcast. I'm curious, just the genesis of how you guys got started with On the Bench, what you've enjoyed about doing it, and just tell me a little bit about the process that you went through of getting it started. I'm always fascinated by people who are kind of in this space doing things and just what you feel like you've gotten out of it.
Well, it was kind of funny because, again, like I mentioned before, when I quit coaching, when I quit coaching the boys, nobody believed it. Everybody thought, well, you'll go back coaching, next year or whenever. And I'm like, no, I'm not, and I've been friends with Zac Jackson. He was friends with cousins of mine, and I've known him for a really long time. And I just happened to see him one day that summer, and he's like, hey, what are you going to do, with all your time next year? And I'm like, well, I don't know. He says, well, we should start a podcast. Well, if you don't know, Zac works for The Athletic. He covers the Browns. He's done radio. He's, has a podcast with Andre Knott, and, very successful in his own way through social media and everything else. And he said, I'm serious. There's nothing available right now for high school basketball. He said, the newspapers, radio show, they're not covering it. They don't really have a voice. He said, I think we could do something, just a way to stay involved. And he had the equipment. He lived about a mile from my house. So he said, yeah, let's do it. And we came up with the On the Bench name, and really I really enjoyed it because I felt like it was a way, again, to give back to the coaching community what had been given to me. Second of all, I thought it was an incredible way. I felt bad for the lack of coverage, media-wise, that high school programs get now. And I thought, if we can have a coach on to give them 30 minutes to tell us about their kids, their program, what they want their program to stand for, and the opportunity for them to tell parents, booster club members, administration, hey, listen to this podcast. I'm out there supporting and promoting our school and our program. I thought that was something that it'd be a nice thing for every school to have the opportunity to be on. And it was really rewarding for me also to be able to stay involved in the game, to be able to talk to coaches and share some things. I mentioned before, I really enjoyed when coaches used to get together and just talk about things for a while, and this was a way to do that. And it's kind of slowed down a little bit since I've been coaching the girls, and of course, this time of year was always difficult because Zac's real job is covering the Browns. But I really enjoyed it. I mean, there wasn't a time that I came home from talking to a coach, whether it was a veteran coach or a new coach, that I didn't feel good about the opportunity that was given. And, maybe I'm still looking to, kind of affirm maybe the job that I did, as far as it's always nice when you hear somebody has a similar philosophy that you do. And so I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot out of it also.
Yeah, I think the thing that I've enjoyed about it is, since I'm not coaching anymore, one of the things I always say that I loved about coaching was just sitting in the coach's office after practice or after games and just talking to your buddies about basketball. And that's one of the things that I really, really miss. And you start thinking about what a podcast can be and what it is I get to have conversations with coaches at all levels of the game, from grassroots AAU coaches to high school coaches to college coaches. And then we've had some different NBA people that have come on. And it's just to be able to pick those people's brains and have those coaches' office conversations with people, for me, has been incredibly valuable and just a blast. I mean, I just love, as you described, just sitting there and being able to pick people's brains and have those conversations about basketball that I just didn't get any other way that I used to get out of coaching. And then the second thing that I think is interesting that you mentioned, and it's so true, is the lack of coverage in terms of local media for high school sports. And clearly there are different outlets that are doing, whether it's putting stuff on social media, and there's still some coverage, but there certainly isn't the coverage that there might have been back when you and I were playing in high school basketball, where you had 2 or 3 reporters from the Cleveland Plain Dealer or the Akron Beacon Journal that were just on the high school beat and covering and knowing the teams and all that stuff. And now, like, you want to find information, like, good luck. You want to find a high school basketball box score, good luck. If you know where to find one of those, you're a lot smarter than I am, because every time I go to try to look for something, it's almost impossible to find anymore. Whereas I know you were probably the same as me. Like, growing up, that was the first thing I did on Saturday morning or Sunday morning, was get up and scour the box scores and look at which teams won and who scored what points. And so to be able to provide some of that in some small way, I think has got to be, for a guy like you who's grown up in it and is a lifer, has to be incredibly satisfying to be able to just provide that coverage, at least to some degree, that you and I probably took for granted when we were kids.
You're right. And, 2 things that along those same lines, I had a parent tell me one time where we had that community's coach on, and he was able to talk about his kids a little bit. And I had a parent, and all he did was mention, Johnny Smith is, returning guard for us, and we're really looking forward to what he's going to bring to the table this year. And I had a parent tell me that, that was one of their greatest highlights, was hearing someone else on any type of media outlet mention their kid's name, because they could remember, their parents listening to a game on the radio and how excited they'd get when, Rudy Pie Karski said something about that was Johnny Smith scoring 2 points, or something.
Absolutely.
Just hearing the name out there really meant a lot to them. And I was really surprised when we did the podcast. I guess I wasn't surprised, but I guess I was pleasantly pleased at the feedback we would get from younger coaches. And I mean coaches that were, just entering into the teaching profession, that wanted to be involved in coaching. And the number of listeners that we had in that area that were really getting a lot out of it. I mean, they were getting a lot of things from coaches, the different coaches that we had on there who had different philosophies, styles, ideas, and were not afraid to share them. We had feedback from people that were sitting there and had a little notebook, and they would, keeping notes of everything from, that Dave Close had to say, or that, TK Griffith had to say. I mean, it was, I'm really happy with it, I guess.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think has been really satisfying on our end too, is to be able to send something out. You're talking into the microphone, and clearly you're hoping that what you do is going to find an audience. But when you hear from people who really do appreciate what you're doing, and they send you a message, whether it's an email or they hit you on social media or they pick up the phone, or it's people that that say, hey, I listened to this episode and I really got a lot out of that, or boy, I liked listening to this coach because it's somebody that I know, but I didn't know that about them. That's one of the things that's really the most satisfying about what it is that we do. Let's wrap it up here with a question that's kind of been one that's become my standard bearer at the end of episodes lately, and it's one that I think really gets to the heart of who you are as a coach. So first question, or first part of the question is, what do you see as your biggest challenge moving forward as the head girls coach at Barberton High School? And then number two, what is the biggest joy that you get every day from waking up and thinking about getting to go in and coach your team?
The first part is just developing the program. I mean, it's a from the bottom to the top. When I took over the program, we had a third grade team. We had part of a sixth grade team. We didn't have any fifth graders that were involved. And to really go out there and find someone that could lead the youth program, and to, get enough kids and the girls in the sixth grade, fifth grade, fourth grade to have three teams, and to kind of build that. I think that's our biggest challenge right now. I mean, when I was a boys coach, I felt like, okay, I'm going to do this job forever. I know I'm the girls coach, I'm not going to do this job forever, but I want to make sure that whenever I'm no longer the girls coach here, that the program is in a upward trajectory. I want to leave a stamp on it from there, and I think that's our biggest challenge. I think we've got to get more girls involved. We're making progress. We've got some great people that are working in our youth programs, and I think that I look at that as my greatest challenge. And part two, I forgot what the second part was. What was this?
Greatest joy. The greatest joy.
I'll tell you, the greatest joy is I know when I go into the gym that those girls are going to be happy to be together. I always tell the story that, I'm still not, but I was never one of those guys where, okay, practice starts at 3:00. Well, we're going to spend the first 15 minutes of practice stretching, getting loose, those kind of things. To me, it was like, hey, you do that on your own time. When I walk in the gym at 3:00, we're practicing, we're getting after it, that kind of thing. And with the girls, when I kind of went into it like, okay, that's going to be the same thing. Well, a couple of the girls came to talk to me, and they said, Coach, listen, we need to stretch. And I'm like, well, then go ahead. You can stretch in your own time. No. Coach, we need our stretch bands. We need to stretch. We need that 15 minutes to stretch. And then once we've done that, we'll do whatever you want us to do. And I'm kind of still pretty skeptical. Well, then I'm kind of watching them, and that 15 minutes, and they need that. They need that from a social aspect, because that's why they're playing. They're not playing for the glory. Most of them aren't playing to get a scholarship. They're playing because they really enjoy being around each other. They enjoy being around people that like the game like they do, and they need that time from a social standpoint. And so the joy I get is actually watching them during that time, because there's not one of them stretching. They got the band laying there and they act like they're doing something, but they're not stretching. But what they are doing is they're clearing the air from, getting rid of all the gossip that happened in the school day. They're getting, that is such a vital part of who they are. But they get in a circle, they talk it all out, they get that 15, they've been true to their word. They take those 15 minutes to kind of decompress the school day, and then they're ready to go. And the joy I get is just kind of watching them during that time. I look forward to it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's one of the things that, obviously, I've coached both boys and girls over the course of my coaching career. And I think that when you talk about what you get with the girls versus the boys, there's definitely a different level of connection when a girls team is going right. And there's just a bond that I don't think you ever necessarily get as a whole group on the boys' side. It's just different. Yep. And I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's something that coaches who have had both experiences, I think, can definitely relate to. I want to wrap things up there, Ken, give you a chance before we get out to let people know where they can find out more about you, find out more about your program, where they can reach out to you if they just have a basketball question, they want to talk some hoops with you. How can they find you? And then I'll jump back in and wrap up the episode.
Well, the easiest way, obviously, you can always email me through the school email address, which is krector@barbertonschools.org. And we also have a Lady Magic's Twitter page, which you can find out information about our program there. And, of course, we still have the On the Bench podcast Twitter page, and back episode. That's the other thing about the podcast we found out. It was incredible to me, the number of people that go back and re-listen to different episodes that we have. So all our past episodes are still available, and still there are some incredible coaches that are on there that represent the best of high school basketball, that are not afraid to share everything that they feel like has been a success to them. So I'm easy to get a hold of. You can always, I started to say you can always come watch us play, but this year,
not this year. It doesn't look like,
but hopefully next year. So, but
yeah, absolutely,
Mike, I really appreciate it. What you're doing for the game is awesome, and
well, thanks, Ken.
I've enjoyed it.
Awesome. I really appreciate that. The kind words are always very much appreciated. And like I said, I think for you coming on here and jumping on and being a part of what we're trying to do, I can't thank you enough for doing that. And to our audience out there, if you haven't listened to Ken's podcast On the Bench, make sure you go and do that. As he said, one of the things that's most interesting about this format is you can go back and listen to something that was a conversation between coaches a year or two ago, and it can be just as relevant today as it was when it was first recorded. So please go back and give Ken's podcast a listen. After you listen to this one, go and pick out an episode of his podcast and check that out, the On the Bench podcast with Ken and his partner, Zac. So let's wrap things up there. I really appreciate you joining us tonight, Ken, and to everyone out there, thanks for listening, and we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks. If you have an existing podcast or are looking to launch your own pod but aren't sure where to start, the team at My Podcast Manager can help. Our podcast team works behind the scenes so you can do what you do best. We'll help you launch your podcast, make it sound great, and free up your time for the more enjoyable parts of podcasting. If you're ready to put your podcast editing, production, and promotion on autopilot with a trusted team of podcasting professionals, visit mypodcastmanager.com to get started.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.